And that kind of thing would, I could see why it would take such a mental toll on him, because he wasn't used to that kind of lifestyle growing up as a child in Cleveland. He went from a kid from the lower middle class in Cleveland to a prestigious student with exceptional talent at the greatest school that any musical student could ever aspire to. So that's one of the reasons why I could say that his change in lifestyle from his life in Cleveland to his life in New York was probably one of the greatest causes to why he ended up living on the streets. Because that kind of thing would take a lot of pressure on you. So, if we look at Nathaniel's outburst when he was talking to Dr. Kershaw.
Was that when he started like the mother and stuff like that?
Yeah, that scene. What do you guys think of that scene? Would you say that it was Steve's fault that he acted like that?
Yeah, because he kind of felt set up, right?
Yes.
Like, Nathaniel doesn't really, he's not interested in help from anybody except Steve, right? So when you bring up like a doctor or anyone like that around him and you don't even let him know that you're gonna bring him there, you don't let Nathaniel know ahead of time that, somebody's gonna come examine you or ask you questions and stuff like that, then, Nathaniel, especially when you have kind of a hatred for doctors, you're gonna kind of feel betrayed, right? So then I guess that kind of betrayal enraged Nathaniel and made him like take his anger out on.
It was an impulse reaction.
Yeah, impulse.
I'll say that's what it is.
But if you look at it another way, it doesn't have to be Steve's fault. Because at this point in the story, Nathaniel and Steve are pretty close, right? Steve trusts Nathaniel, and we could assume that Nathaniel trusts Steve. So the point is, or the idea is that at this point where they both have mutual trust for each other, could you really say that Steve is to blame for Nathaniel going off on the doctor?
Well,
Because at this point, maybe Steve thought that he knew Nathaniel well enough to say that maybe Nathaniel's changed and maybe he's not going to act the way he would have when I first met him.
Yeah, but he's just trying to get them in psychiatric help, right? And then you would see that you would realize that Steve is feeling that, oh, he's finally getting better in some way, right? Because you would see that he's not fighting anymore, or he's not acting in violent ways, right? But when you would see Nathaniel actually act out, how do you think that made Steve feel? Because at the end of the day, he's just trying to get help. He's just trying to make his life better. And when Nathaniel will go on and act out against Steve like that, or even at the time where he nearly he beat up Steve, I guess, like in the lab department. Well, how do you think that makes Steve feel?
I don't think that makes Steve feel. I don't think Steve built up any anger towards Nathaniel because it's expected. And if anything, I think Steve feels kind of guilty, like he feels that he did something wrong, or Steve feels that he could have done something to prevent that from happening.
No, but at a certain point, you would see that Steve feels like, oh, he's getting better, so he would feel joyous, right?
Yeah,
and then he would he would just set himself up for disappointment when Nathaniel would act out.
Yeah, but he's been warned. Like he's been warned by multiple people saying, this is schizophrenia, it doesn't heal like in a snap. There's so much you have to do to them. It's so slow. Like you can't just rush them to treatment and things like that. So he should know that he knows Nathaniel doesn't like treatment, and rushing him and stuff like that shouldn't be any good. So.
But this brings us back to the original question that Steve posed early in the story, where he questioned whether or not Nathaniel was happy the way he is without Steve's interference at all.
And he's happy.
But when you say happy, Steve asks Nathaniel if he's happy. Now, his perspective of happy is just playing music in that tunnel. But Steve's perspective of happy is having a nice apartment, a nice family, and everything. So I think they're just two different things.
Yeah.
This is true happiness. Happiness
is whatever makes you happy.
Whatever makes you happy, exactly. So if living on the streets is happy for somebody, you can't tell them that they're not happy. That's their kind of lifestyle.
So I think the problem is that Steve has a certain perspective of happiness, and then Nathaniel has a different view of happiness, where Nathaniel's just happy playing music, worshipping the Beethoven statue, and Steve is used to that, I don't want to say regular life, but that's generally what it is, where he has a family, he has a job, and he's comfortable. So I think that the problem here is that Steve has his own idea of what's happy and what makes someone happy, and Nathaniel has his own idea. And the problem is Steve is trying to force.
Him to his happiness, like
Yeah.
him to have his happiness. Yeah, you see that when he keeps trying to get him, he's so eager to have, try to have him go to treatment and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And he does like things like give him a cello, but say, oh, you can't use a cello unless you go to treatment. He tries bribing him and stuff just so he can get him the treatment. But he doesn't realize that
Yeah, but
Daniel's not happy in treatment.
but he thinks that that's the proper incentive for him to get into treatment. Because if you think about it, let's say you have a little kid, and you want your little kid to do a certain thing,
Yeah.
and you tell them, oh, if you do this, I'll give you this. That's basically the same approach that
Yeah,
Steve
same
used
thing still.
towards Nathaniel. So if you want to play the cello, come to the land. And you see that that does improve his Nathaniel's mentality towards rehabilitation and the LAMP facility somewhat, because he actually does end up going to the LAMP apartment, and then you see near the end of the book where he's actually fine with having his own studio in the village facility. So it worked to some extent, but there's still more that he could have done.
Yeah. But in that case, I think friendship, in their situation, I think friendship was better than a medication for Nathaniel.
I think in Nathaniel's case, friendship would have helped him much more than medication, because
And the music.
he's lived for so long without any real friends. And if you look back to his life in Juilliard, you can see that as a teenager and a young adult, he didn't really have many people that he could call as being true friends. In fact, now that we look at it, we don't have any indication that Nathaniel had any true friends, even as a child. So I think Steve's friendship with Nathaniel was what really could have helped him in the story.
It helped him.
Yeah, he's been shunned from the world as a mentally ill person, and the world does not look up to him. They don't know who he is or anything like that. So if anyone was to show like kindness towards him or give him a helping hand, all he needed was a friend, and that's what he got from Steve.
One of the things I analyzed was that the mentally ill are really, there's a very deep stigma about them in our society, and I think that's one of the reasons that Nathaniel was affected so deeply, because we see many mentally ill people, we hear stories about them, but there aren't many programs available to treat them. And in many cases, they don't even want help. We see Nathaniel, he seems happy where he is. But it's not really his fault. Maybe it's society's fault because they're not providing people with the necessary treatment. Because if we look back maybe 200 years ago, we see that the mentally ill, they weren't really treated as being ill. The mentally ill were considered being witches or all sorts of strange.
Demons or devils
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Or possessed by things. Like you say, yeah.
Yeah. If we were to change the way that we viewed the mental ill and the way that we sought treatment for them, maybe people like Nathaniel wouldn't be in the position that they end up in.
We have to change our view upon or about the mentally ill, like people have changed their views about black people or any other race people, because before obviously they were racially segregated, but then over time you learn to accept these kind of things, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all one people. You see, he's black, you're black, we're brown, but we have to show that same approach of acceptance towards the mentally ill people, and that's the only way we can actually help these people out, and that's the only way more people in the land like Nathaniel can actually get help and not sit there and wonder or reject the idea of rehabilitation or any help that they can receive.
I think one of the reasons why people who are mentally ill or just mentally incapable, the reason they don't want to initiatively seek help is because maybe they fear the effects of medication. So in this case, I think the friendship between Lopez and Nathaniel is more beneficial than any medication, because Nathaniel learned to trust Steve quicker than anyone would have learned to trust medication.
So that kind of leads to the question I had, is like, what would be good reasoning for why Nathaniel is the way he is right now, or at the current time in the book? So I think a big reason why he is, like, he's really stubborn, he can be stubborn. I think that's, like, it's because the trust issues he has. Like, when he was being treated before, the things they did to him, like, they strapped him down and did, like, very, like, bad things, like, things that seemed pretty
shock
evil.
therapies and
Shock
stuff.
therapies and stuff like that didn't work at all, but they did it to him, and then he lost trust. That made him lose trust for people. So I think that the shock therapy has a big impact, and it's also why he doesn't want medication, why he refuses medication. But it kind of shows how much he really trusts Steve to have those kind of memories in his head, but still try to give in to it. So it shows that he has a lot of trust for Steve.
But it's not just that. Another thing that could have influenced it is the fact that Nathaniel's been on his own for a really long time. He's about in his 50s at the start of the book. He lives on his own. So, being a middle-aged man, living on your own, and living on your own for who knows how long, we're looking at probably since the 20s, mid-20s, he's a character who has to be stubborn, because that's the only way he can get what he wants in this world. Because he's lived on his own for so long, he just needs to be asserted. So that's one of the main reasons why he's as stubborn as he is now.
Yeah, so I want to go to Steve real quick and about his life, because he's devoted a lot of time, I think around 2 years, to helping out Nathaniel. And if you just if you look at it this way, Steve, he has his own life as well. He has a family.